thank you so much for having me. What I'll do this morning is just talk through who I am and kind of what I do, and the story, a little bit about the story as to how we got to this point. And I'll split the talk between talking about Chelsea 2 years ago, and then a little bit of kind of exclusive insight, if you like, into Chelsea this year, the garden that we're doing in 8 weeks' time it starts, which is terrifying. I'm quite glad to have my back to this, because this gives me heart palpitations as I kind of look at this and I remember just the sheer scale of the operation. But I'll take this off the screen, we'll come back to this in a minute. But if you wanted to know, this is 11 days reduced down to 1 minute. And I'll talk about kind of what's going on and point a few things out. But for those of you who've been watching it for the last hour, you probably memorise it anyway. So I'm Joe, this is my wife Laura. This is us stood in Salt House, for those of you who know that area. And we live just the other side of Holt. And we've been in Norfolk for nearly 4 years now. And my dad is here actually to also fact check everything I say. So actually my parents have moved recently as well up to the area. So although we're not from Norfolk, we have, I didn't, but my wife did give birth to a Norfolk resident through and through Norfolk child. So our 2-year-old now was born at the Norfolk and Norwich, so we feel like we should be accepted by the local community now. But we actually moved from Luton, and before that we were in St Albans, and before that in different places. And Laura's actually from Wales originally. So we met at uni, and the rest is history. You don't want to know that backstory. We'll just go from, we landed in Norfolk, and we set up a business designing gardens, and we definitely came at this sort of, we sort of describe it as coming at it through the back door. So a lot of people train in garden design, and they will probably go and do a long diploma, or they'll do a kind of horticulture qualification. But Laura and I were both trained in design, and I used to teach design, and Laura used to actually run her own business kind of in the realms of design. And we just fell in love with our own garden, and that was really the route for us into essentially packing in our jobs. I've been a teacher for over 11 years, and Laura had worked in various different roles within marketing and within design and for charities, and we just thought, let's give this a go. And that is cutting a long story short, but that's how we ended up in Norfolk, basically setting up a business and seeing if we could make a go of it. And we were just really, really blessed. We just felt, we both have a faith, and we both, we prayed about that. That's quite a big decision. And we felt definitely led to this area, and we felt led to do all of those things. And we felt that those decisions were then confirmed by the fact that certain doors opened and other doors closed. And so that's kind of how we navigated that situation. But one of the big doors that flung open was, I think it was probably about midnight one night. We were both struggling to sleep, and Laura happened to mention that there was this application form to apply to do a show garden at Chelsea, which was hilarious because we had probably 2 or 3 finished gardens to our name in our very young business. And although we definitely found our shared skill set, and we definitely found our groove, and we realised that my sort of background in materials and making things was really helpful, and Laura has a real passion for plants. So sorry if I disappoint at question time later. If you've got plant-specific questions you don't want to ask me. We joke that we have half a brain each, so we run the business literally together, and it would not work without either one of us involved. So I applied for this application, and the way it works is Chelsea show gardens are funded. They cost a lot. They cost as much as a small house, each one, which might seem ridiculous. When you see what goes on behind the scenes, you might then see why. And this was for a charitable, you had to have a charitable message. So we partnered with a charity and we said, we want to design a garden for you. Do you want a garden at Chelsea? Because that gives you more exposure than you'd get by just running an ad campaign, or which also costs, thousands. With Chelsea comes, 12 hours of BBC coverage, the King walking on you. It's a massive escalation in terms of exposure to the public. So it's a really exciting opportunity. And so we went through the process, and after we got quite far, and we got into the final picking for Chelsea, and we were then a bit panicked because we thought, do we actually know enough to do this? And we got onto the reserve list, and then didn't quite make it to the show. So this must have been nearly 3 or 4 years ago. But because of my character and my nature, I was just inspired to try again. And so we just applied again, and that application went all the way through and ended up being the Talitha Arts Garden, which was in 2023. So this charity, they work with people who've experienced trauma of any kind, anywhere on the scale. Could be from homelessness right through to abuse, through loss of a loved one. So they've really worked with a broad range of people. And our job was to convey their message in garden form, which is really, really quite challenging, but a challenge that we both, Laura and I, really love to get our minds into. So hopefully, as I kind of unpack the narrative for you a little bit, you'll see kind of what the tricks are and what the things are within design that people use to convey a message. Generally speaking, the public will walk up to a garden and they'll be there for 5 minutes maximum, and in that 5 minutes they want to be able to read the space. You want to convey an atmosphere and an emotion, perhaps. And you'll have some literature with the garden, and the person takes that away, and it should all tie together. And so that's what we aim to do. And also it's judged. So we're balancing what the charity want, and we're balancing what the RHS want, and we're balancing what the judges want. And then there's us as well as a small business thinking, this is kind of our first, and possibly at the time our only, opportunity to push our name out there and get onto the stage in what is described as the world's biggest flower show. So this is an internationally recognised platform. Just by show of hands, and don't worry if no hands go up, but who's been to the Chelsea Flower Show or Hampton Court or any of the other RHS shows? Great, okay, just so I know who I'm pitching to. So the garden, I must give up on this button, there we go. The garden had a clear narrative around trauma, and we started with this palette of kind of bruised plum tones in the planting. And that's because the charity told us that trauma never really goes away. You can work with people with trauma, but it's not something you just fix and they move on. So we started with this idea that there's always bruises of the past in someone who's recovered from trauma. And what I should say is the charity use the creative arts as their vehicle to helping people to recover. So they're a very creative charity. They do lots of workshops, lots of making, and even lots of theatre and drama skills with people of all ages. One of their biggest things they do is go into care homes and help people with dementia and the families of those of people with dementia, because there is a trauma attached to that, kind of the losing of someone even though they're still here. So they do lots of work in lots of spaces. So we had this kind of plum bruised palette. Our trees were these are the Prunus cerula, they're also called a Tibetan cherry, and they had kind of scarring in the bark, which is kind of how they grow, and peeling. And so that again kind of layers up the narrative of scars of the past, bruises of the past. And so the whole, a bit like an oil painting, we started with our dark backdrop first in all the planting. And then we have, and hopefully you can kind of see this, once you get your head into it, you can kind of start to read the garden like you would maybe look at piece of artwork, you can then see, okay, we've brought in some slightly more joyful pops of colour, kind of white frothy sprays of grass heads and things like that. And then we had these porcelain butterflies. We had, we say we had 300. We definitely had 300 made. I think when it came to it, only about 120 actually were in the garden, because we realised that, and this is the thing, is when you start building this, you then think, actually 300 is quite a lot, and so we started taking some out. And these are handmade butterflies, and the narrative there is that when you recover from trauma, or you are able to move on a step in the road to recovery, you are able to, you're basically able to flourish, and you get wings, and you're able to kind of rise above the situation. And so a caterpillar in the garden is bound to wriggling around on the floor, and the transformation process means that you can become a butterfly and transform, and your context might be exactly the same. The garden for that butterfly might have been the same, but they've got a different perspective and a different view. So that's where the butterfly narrative came from. And then we had this, which is a huge, about about a metre 20 tall, chrysalis sculpture, and that was made actually locally here. And that again is to describe what the charity do. They are a safe space, they're a cocoon, there's something that, they're a place that people can come to and essentially transform. So that's it really. It's as simple and as difficult as that, to try and convey a message in a garden. On the back wall as well, we've got timber that's been charred, which is a kind of a preserving method that originates in two different places, but it's mainly described as a Japanese method. We do it here with larch, where you kind of burn the surface of the wood. And that again was part of the narrative, because the charity are very theatrical. They have a lot of actors who work with them and for them. I might even have a picture of one or two you might recognise. So there's sort of a curtain aesthetic to the back wall, but also the charring is just to do with that sense of trauma being a kind of a time of adversity that perhaps gives you a bit of a thick skin, and so the wood is literally speaking into that narrative as well. So this is the garden as a whole. So you might walk up to that and not know half of that, but the idea is we've got things in the garden to draw the public into that conversation and kind of promote the charity and get people into conversations about how they can support and what they can do for the work of the charity, or how they can access the services if they are someone who would benefit from the work of the charity. We were an indoor exhibit, which was the second year they'd done that. So we were one of the smallest show gardens at the show, but we're judged on the same standard as the main avenue ones, which are sort of 20 metres by sort of 10 to 15 metres wide. So this is a 6 by 8 metre plot, and the criteria and the scrutiny is exactly the same. So we were really nervous about judging. As I've explained, this was our first attempt really at doing anything like this, and it's probably 18 months of work comes together in that video that you saw, 11 days, and it goes up quicker than you can imagine. So here's some little views of the garden, which if you've been on our website will look very familiar. The beauty of a Chelsea show garden is it's instant. We would never plant like this in real life. We do a lot of work, domestic gardens and a few public spaces, and when planting goes in, it is very underwhelming because we plant accurately. So if a plant needs a metre to spread, you'll see a little plant and then a metre and then another one, because that's the right way to do it. At Chelsea we're looking at 25 plants a square metre, and with another probably 50 of the same plants for that square metre growing elsewhere, just in case. So we have 3 times the amount of plants for that density, and that density is a bit bonkers, because in reality in a square metre you might have 2 to 3 plants, in a garden that you're planting up long term. This is kind of around the water's edge. There was a bit of water in the garden that you can't see in that picture. And this was our kind of prized plants in the space, which was an Enkianthus. And if you go to Sheringham Park and you go down the track, kind of as if you're heading off around the corner, if you take a left towards a sign that says handkerchief tree this way, which is very hard to spot the handkerchief tree if you've ever tried to find it, and it's not very, I think it's a bit poorly. But on the way to that is this beautiful, huge, well there's 2 or 3 actually, Enkianthus. They grow really well in this area because they like slightly acidic soil. And they're just majestic, and they flower in May, which is really what you want for something going to Chelsea, which is in May. And we wanted it for the colour palette, these almost kind of teardrop shaped plants, very delicate. It's quite an interesting thing to bring to the show, and it matched the soil type that we had said the show garden would be, because everything is imagined, but you have to stick to your rules that you set out. And we didn't have an Enkianthus, we couldn't find one big enough until probably about now actually, so kind of March time, just before we were getting ready to pack up and build the thing, we had planned for another large shrub to go in, and then our tree supplier said, "Oh, was it you that wanted an Enkianthus?" And we said, "Yes," because we'd looked everywhere. We'd gone as far as Germany. We didn't physically go, but we'd maximised all the nurseries in Britain, and we went through to places like Holland and Germany grew quite a few, and they didn't have anything big enough. And the tree supplier said, "Well, I just was on the nursery, and I forgot, but we've got some huge ones around here, come and have a look." And it was bittersweet, because we turned the corner, it must have been later than March, but we turned the corner, and there was sort of 3 huge Enkianthus like I'd never seen before, and they were all budding. And we were like, this is brilliant, but we need to slow them down because they're going to flower, and they only flower for sort of 20 days, and then they drop suddenly. And you can't have that at Chelsea. The judges say they want to see a whisper of the past, the promise of the future, but they want to see the garden at its best on that day, on the Saturday, for the 1 hour that they're in the garden. So it is really perilous. So we didn't want to get into the realms of, some people traditionally have done things like putting plants into cooling trucks and cooling them down artificially, or forcing them on, bring them on with heat mats and things. And we just thought, sustainability-wise and also budget-wise, we don't want to get into that. We want the garden to just be naturally at its best when you see it, because we've brought the right things to the show. So we tagged it, we bought it, and we got it delivered, and we opened the back of the lorry when it arrived, and it was fully in flower. And we were 20 days till the end of the show from the day that it arrived, and we're looking at a shrub that drops its flowers with very little warning, and doesn't have much as a shrub, doesn't then look like much really without its flowers, so we really needed it to hold on. And we got it out, we were in the marquee, and thankfully the marquee was about 5 degrees cooler than outside. You'd think it would be the opposite way around, but by some miracle, it was like a fridge in there. So we put it in the garden, and I can tell you now, it dropped its first flower. So the judges come and judge it Saturday, Sunday, then it's press day and the royals come and visit on the Monday, and then they award the award on the Tuesday, and then the show is open for the rest of that week. And the first flower dropped on the Wednesday morning. And then by the Saturday, the ground around the shrub was beautiful. It's like confetti, but it was completely covered. And when we took the tree out, just a little shake was all it took for everything to go woof and drop off. So we got away with it, and it was really, really amazing. It was the plant we got asked about the most. In fact, someone would walk up to the garden and I would almost say, it's called an Enkianthus, before they even opened their mouth, because I knew what they were going to ask. This is the plant palette. We had some very interesting, kind of rare and specialist plants. that we had grown in Norfolk. We tried to bring, because we were new to Norfolk, we thought it'd be quite canny to use as many local contractors and fabricators as we could, because then we would build a relationship much quicker with those people, and that has really paid off. So our stone was carved by Chusa Wilson, who's done a lot of the carvings. He's actually does a lot of headstones, a lot of plinths in the area, a very master in his art. The steel was from Ken and Bernie, who run Norfolk Engineering in Holt on their Hempstead estate. Plants were grown by places like, if you know, Howard's, which is a Norfolk grower. Natural Surroundings in Glanford also grew for us. They then became an RHS partner garden after the show, which is really amazing, because I think it brought the attention of the RHS to what they were doing as a nursery, and that then is an ongoing partnership. Needless to say, so we practiced on the way in. We were living in Battersea for the month. My parents were dutifully looking after our children every day, and we kind of all went as a big family unit, because that was the best and easiest way to do it, rather than trying to travel back and forth. So we're walking in about 6 a.m. and we're practicing our bronze medal faces. You know, like when you see it in an awards ceremony and the camera comes right up to the person's face and they have to do a very noble kind of slow clap, even though they're dying inside. So we rehearsed our bronze medal and our silver medal reactions, because we really did not know what to expect. And they're very cruel. BBC come in, the cameras are on, and they ask you a question, but they're not listening to the answer, because they want to catch you in the middle of a sentence when we didn't know this, and now I do, but when the medal comes in, you don't know that they're coming. So they said, tell us about your garden. So we're talking this way, and I'm very aware that someone is coming in from the left with a bit of paper. My heart starts pounding. But it was a gold medal, which is really exciting, which means that we had achieved, by some miracle we'd achieved, because you get marked down very quickly. Gold can erode very quickly. If you have any plant health issues, like a caterpillar's nibbled a bit of a leaf, that's a 1 mark on one plant. If you have a trip hazard, or you have something that's a bit rattly, like we had boulder seats that were a bit wobbly the day before judging, and we were packing them out and making sure they didn't rock. Anything like that is a mark off the list. So very quickly you drop to silver gilt, and then you drop to silver, and then you drop to bronze, and then there is even a no medal category. So we were really, really pleased, which is an understatement. And then 30 minutes later, another person came in, and we were talking to another camera, and so much so I thought we were done. This lady walked in with this huge vase, and I stepped backwards out of the way to let her through, assuming she's on her way to somewhere else. And she stopped and she said, "You've won Best in Show." And so there's another big kind of round of applause. At that time of day, there's only about 15 people in front of you, and they're all film crew who it's kind of second nature to them. So there's a kind of pitiful applause. And there's me, which is with this giant vase, which is just what every parent of a 6-month-old and 3-year-old wants, is a ginormous, a very unbalanced glass vase to try and get home. But yeah, we were really, really overwhelmed, really. And even now, that vase kind of sits in our studio on our shelf, and we look at it occasionally, and we just think that was a bit mad that we got that. But we were very, very pleased. And this is the video that you saw. And I'll just very quickly, because I think I'm at the slightly over halfway point, just quickly play this. So this was made in Holt. The steel here. This is Chelsea site soil. So the site gets reset every year, so the soil gets moved around in lots and lots. These are the trees, they're from Bedford. We are swapping out plants, we're testing butterflies, and then once we get to a certain point, the planting team come in, and you can see here, this starts to look quite finished around here, and we were a bit ahead of the game. And then Laura had a sleepless night, she said, I want to do that bit again. So any minute now you see it get deplanted. which is there, and then replanted. We plant in pots, and you raise the plant up, you sometimes cut the rim off the pot, and then you plant them all in pots, so it looks very densely planted, and it is, but the plants are actually then kind of top dressed, so it's all sort of smoke and mirrors really. And then the gravel goes in last, and that is, I'm exhausted looking at it, but that's the process. This year we're building outside, and it's a much longer build and a much more complicated build. Yeah, this year will be an adventure, I'm sure. So following that, we then were awarded a couple of awards by various press. So we were given a Rising Star Award by House and Garden magazine. So they chose 25 garden designers nationally who looked to be kind of on a trajectory to doing exciting and interesting things in the industry. And then we won the top award, which was their Rising Star kind of winner, if you like. And we had to do a bizarre photo shoot where we weren't allowed to smile. And we had various people there that we reckon it's quite bizarre coming into something as a career changer and suddenly mixing with all the people that you've been following, I suppose, for years before that. So we stood there with, at Chelsea, we stood there with Monty Don and thinking, so this is normal now, this is kind of, how has this happened? And various people, Angelica Bell interviewed us, and I thought, I remember being 5 years old and watching you on CBeebies, so it's kind of a strange world that you get plunged into. And I don't have pictures on here, but Bill Bailey turned up and was chatting away and went on the garden, and we had Tamsin Gregg, who you might know from various comedy, she's a comedy actress, she's affiliated with a charity, so she was there. Laura was summoned one morning because Rishi Sunak's wife, Akshata Murthy, was wanted. She's a big donor into into the charity sector. She wanted a private view of the garden, so Laura had to just go in and be there and to host her. And he was obviously the Prime Minister at the time. We had Princess Beatrice and a couple of the royals sort of just wander onto the garden and chat and wander off. So the week is a very bizarre week. Anyway, back to this. So we were on a bit of a roller coaster of kind of hitting various press and media outlets and people writing about us. And at the same time, we're still building our kind of normal work, if you like, which is largely domestic gardens in Norfolk. We do other work elsewhere, but that's kind of our bread and butter. So here's a project in Clyde, which we're really pleased with. You can see that the planting is much smaller. This is planted probably about 2 weeks before these photos were taken, and they've grown a bit. And we'll actually do a proper photo call on that garden this year to get website photos, because it takes a year or two to grow to grow things properly. So there's just some views of some interesting things we're doing in that space. And during that time, we were just, particularly me, I'm probably out of the two of us, I'm the more future focused, always thinking about the next thing. And I was just thinking, what should we do for our next show garden? As if that's just going to land in our laps, And a good friend of ours, so we go to church in Weybourne, and Ian is our vicar, and Jo, Ian's wife, went for a walk in Blakeney with the dog, and in the marshes, as you might know, the tide can just sort of slowly rise, and you suddenly think, oh, can't go back that way. And she had this experience, and she was just elated. She came back and she said, took the dog for a walk, and I had to change my plans, I had to go the long way around, and I had to wade through water, and it was safe, but it was, in my mind, that would have been a huge interruption to my day, but in her mind, it was a bonus. It was more time out in nature in this beautiful setting, and really embodied the kind of slow you down colloquialism of this area, and we were just really fascinated by that as a message. And wouldn't it be great if we could build a garden around this idea that actually slowing down is something we don't tend to do, and we think that more is more, and particularly in the world of work, if we run out of time, all we really think we need to do is just push harder and kind of be more productive. So this is, you might need to remember this image for when you see this year's garden. So this year's garden is called the Freedom to Flourish Garden. It was originally had other names, but because we're sponsored by a law firm, we have to be just careful about some of the wording, because as a law firm, they obviously want to also present the right image. So we had one phrase at one time which was something about nature arresting your time, and we did chuckle because they were saying, can we not have the word arrest in our title, please? Which is a very fair point. So we've got Freedom to Flourish, which is kind of the very general message about the garden. I'm just going to pause and give some quotes that sort of inspired this. And these are quotes that we were aware of before designing the garden, because part of our faith journey, I suppose, is learning this pattern of trying not to be hurrying and kind of hustling all the time. And part of our move to Norfolk was very much geared towards trying to find a slower pace to life, and we felt Norfolk was the place to try and practice that. So, and if the word Sabbath doesn't really resonate, just swap that for the word rest, because they basically mean the same thing. But a world without Sabbath, which doesn't strictly mean Sunday either, or Saturday, or a whole day, but a period of rest as a regular pattern of your life, basically. So a world without that would be like a man without a smile, summer without flowers, and a homestead without a garden. I can't remember which American president it was, but it was one of them, one of the early ones who said that. This one as well, the solution to an over-busy life is not more time, but it's to slow down and simplify your life around what really matters. Which is quite, if you believe that, that's actually quite groundbreaking and will probably change how you behave through life. The word Sabbath actually just means to stop and delight. So if you think back to our friend walking out in Brekky, when opportunity arose to do so, instead of fretting and rushing and trying to get onto the next thing, just accepting the situation and thinking, right, I'm going to stop and I'm going to delight in this setting and see more of what's around me and kind of pay attention. And this one I find interesting. Hurry and love are like oil and water, and they simply don't mix. If you've ever tried to talk to someone who's set, focused on what they're doing and is in quite a lot of, in a hurry, you're not likely, and I'm definitely guilty of this, going to get a very loving response. So the two parts of our brains work differently, and it's very hard to engage with what's going on around you if you're feeling in a hurry. Learning the unforced rhythms of rest is another phrase that we used to talk about a lot. And this one from Carey, who some of you might know: if the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy. Both sin and busyness, if you like, being a negative thing, being just too busy, always at the capacity of what you can achieve, have the same effect. They basically cut you off from other people, and they can even cut you off from how you are feeling yourself, from your own soul. And that's definitely true of me. If I'm too busy, I become withdrawn from the things that really matter. So the garden, how do you say that in a garden? Well, the garden has a physical body of water that cuts you off. So the water will rise up through the bottom of our show garden this year, like that, and cut off the path. And the hope is that you're in the garden when it does that. And that's the key narrative, is that nature, in our context, in this garden, is rising up and is inviting you to take time to stop and rest. And we're not giving away the time sequence of our water feature as to how long you've got, because it's a really interesting practice to put yourself in a position where you have to wait. And I think in today's society, we've lost the art of boredom. We've lost the art of really not knowing what's next. And there is a skill to that, I think. And so the material palette as well, we've chosen materials that are very slow. So we've got rusted sheet pile that's taken 50 years to get to the colour that it is. We've got salt-washed timber deck that's reclaimed, and it's taken 50, 60 years to look like it does. So the palette in the garden is built of materials that are very slow, so it won't look brand new and clean. It will look like a garden that's been there for a very long time. And within the planting, we've gone for a very peaceful, dare I say, a kind of slow palette. Now that might be a bit strange to think of a colour palette being slow, but it's in a kind of oaty, it's in the sort of oaty range. So we've got this colour in quite a lot of the plants. Those are our heptacodium, our featured trees. Very sandy in colour, and that I guess is a link to North Norfolk, and that kind of palette of colour is everywhere at this time of year up here. And the link to it being there being a kind of culture of, if slow isn't the right word, at least a culture of unhurriedness that we really noticed when we moved here. And then the job then is to go and start sourcing. So this would have been probably last summer into early autumn. Once we'd secured funding and we knew this was a goer, you straight away, along with every other designer at a show, are trying to scramble to get your plants secured before the winter so they can grow on. So we found our trees, which are up here in the background, and this is Laura's kind of showstopper plant, which is called Phacelia, and it's grown as a cover crop in this area. And it's an amazing plant, but it's just seen here as a thing to pass the time in a field to stop the soil drying out. So it's a slow plant, it's very long flowering, and we're actually growing it as a feature. I think we'll get a lot of questions about this, and that's my prediction anyway. Then, this is partly my job, engineering side of things, trying to get it all to work. I won't bore you with these, but I need to show someone. It's only me and one other person who ever gets to see these. But we have to think about all the levels, the water volume. I was saying on my table that our water needs to rise by 30 centimetres, but across the garden that's 6 or 7 cubic metres of water that need to come into the garden and disappear. And all of that is going to be under the garden in a tank. So we're looking at a 2.5 to 3 metre excavation under the garden to take the water down into and then pump the water back up. And it has to be silent. We don't want this kind of and then kind of water rising. We want it to be very, very gentle, kind of rising and falling. So we're in battles at the moment with the RHS team to talk about how deep can we dig, because it's an ancient site. We can't hit anything. It's in the hospital showground, so we've got rules that we have to kind of adhere to there. So I did say there were a lot, but as I say, this is like probably 6 months of work. And then we have lots of meetings. So this is our water engineer, who's called Ben, and Mark over there, who's kind of running the team who's going to do the build. And then we just spent the last sort of 6 months doing nursery visits, looking at pots of soil. Most of the time what Laura wants to see is that there isn't any growth, and we've just tipped into the realms of her wanting to see something now. But you can't force nature. It's amazing how the garden narrative is already kind of teaching us something, because it's a slow process. And sometimes nature just does things on its own time scale. So coming into land, the screen looks like they've both got sunburn there. They don't. Coming into land now, almost sort of final minute or two, but just to sort of give you an idea of what our day-to-day looks like at the moment, in between juggling real work, as we call it, which we shouldn't call it that because it's all real, but projects for clients locally and other places around the UK, keeping up to date with all of those, and managing expectations, because we disappear for 2 months to do Chelsea, and we're doing Hampton Court this year as well, so we actually disappear for maybe 3 months. So we've got to kind of manage that as a business as well. Here we found some sheep pile that's British made, which is quite rare, and it's the right profile. This is on the Isle of Sheppey, so this is a long road trip just to go and find some steel. Here we've got some boulders, which we didn't pick in the end, but we did find a seahorse fossil in one of them, which I took a picture of. Completely pointless, but it was a nice road trip. And there's quite a lot of that. There's quite a lot of going out and looking at things and trying to source things and trying to find the right thing for the garden. And we've been building up a kind of palette of materials. And Richard will know, because we host our sort of midweek home group in the studio that we work. And each week there's different kind of bits on the floor, or bits of straw, bits of rock lying around, because we're kind of collecting this palette of materials as we go. And this is a reclaimed wood yard down near Thurrock. And this is gribble, which is a word I learned, which is barnacle damage. So we wanted wood that had barnacle teeth marks on it, which takes about 20 years to develop. So we need to find a reclaimed wood supplier that can supply us with that level of detail. That's my boot after one road trip, collecting up different things. This is in Glanford. If you go to the Carey company clothes shop, we've just done their garden outside the shop at Glanford Barnes, and that is our Chelsea test bed. So there are things in there that we're doing for Chelsea that we wanted to practice. So with their permission, we've included some of those things in their garden. We're using Norfolk reed as well, so we've worked with the bishops over in Clyde and the Norfolk Wildlife Trust to harvest some Norfolk reed to bring that as a material to the show. And then this is, I think, nearly my final slide. But this is just 1 week. This is last week, I think. Obviously, I went from there down to Southampton, where the garden's being relocated in a charity called the Honey Pot, and then down here to Dorchester, and then, well, no, that's down there actually, down here to a stone quarry, and up here to 2 more quarries to try and find the boulders. And it's exhausting, but it's really fun, because you're going right to the source of a lot of these materials, and you're picking out exactly what you need for the garden. And then lastly, the great irony in a garden about slowing down is that it has been quite fraught at times and quite rushed. So I don't stand here as someone who's definitely nailed it with the ethos of living an unhurried life. There's a really good quote from a guy called John Ortberg about this. I do think if you're trying a practice, if it's a spiritual practice, you can't just, for example, slowing down, you can't just not engage with the world, which is running at a certain pace. You have to test your ability to behave in an unhurried and unflappable way, which I'm not very good at. You have to go out to battle at times. So there's a really nice quote to end on. Peace doesn't come from finding a lake with no storms. It comes from having Jesus in the boat. And that's definitely how we get through, is not to just avoid some of these scary things, but to do it in such a way that we can practice our faith and trust that God kind of has a plan through all of it. So that's kind of where we're at. Really happy to answer any questions, and if you want to follow the journey, please do. We have an Instagram account and a website, and we're only down the road as well, so if you bump into us, please say hello and ask us how it's going. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Absolutely fascinating, Joe, and really eye-opening to me the level of detail and thought and planning that goes into all of this. And one of the things that really came over to me was like the way almost you could see the hand of God leading you through all of this in your story. You didn't make a lot of it, but it was clear that, you know, through all the circumstances that have come together, putting you two together with your complementary skills, and then all the various things in your story, it's clear that you know, you're on a journey for a purpose. So that was fascinating. Anyhow, I'll come around with the mic now, and if you let me know if you'd like to ask a question, and so, okay, starting back here. Okay, Sam.
Okay. Thanks so much for that. Can I just ask, I know you said on the last slide, but how in your day-to-day world do you actually balance your real world, jobs, and then the Chelsea? So, but how do you bring your Christianity, your faith into that? What would you know, what are your practices that keep you come. Because I had a bit of a day like that yesterday. I just needed to have a little walk and a cup of coffee, but I just want to know what you do from a realistic point of view.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. We came to Norfolk to discover a kind of unhurried pace of life, and then the business boomed. And so I don't stand here as someone who has really mastered it, but definitely someone who's in the thick of it at the moment, trying to balance. Our first priority was to, as Christians, to engage with the peace that God offers in our lives, and not to get sucked in by the sort of secular world of just work, run. So we're in the thick of it, but we do have some practices that we've put in place that are kind of red lines, boundaries. So we always have a Sabbath rest, which is a day of joy, a day of kind of family celebration, and we have that on a Saturday. And that is a day that we have never worked to this day, except at Chelsea. But we were known as the garden that took breaks, and we brought a coffee machine and we made our plant team stop, and everyone else was looking at us saying, "Why are you stopping?" And so we definitely had I think an outward expression of that at the show. There are other things like having a work phone, simple things like that, having a work phone that goes off at the weekend, and things that would be very easy when you run your own business to just fill all of your time with work. But also having friends around us who ground us, to make sure that we're not getting sucked in. Because a lot of this is a lot of work. We just create work for ourselves a lot of the time. And a lot of it is, if you think about that quote about simplifying things down to what really matters, it's so easy to lose that. That's actually in the garden. I meant to say, we've got a cliff face kind of boundary, and that's there to say that this idea is very quick to erode when things get busy. So it's a nice idea at the time to think, yeah, I'm going to try and adapt to a slow pace of life. But as soon as something changes, it's the first thing to go. There are a couple of really good books. So the book by John Mark Comer, who's a sort of Christian writer, but he's also a really good sort of philosopher and talks about culture and society. He's written a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hustle and Hurry. That was a game changer for us. There's also some writings by Dallas Willard that we read that talk about seeking the kingdom and not seeking to kind of climb the ladder. And John Morberg as well, who wrote that last. They all sort of talk around the same themes of putting in practices in life to help kind of not get sucked up by the world. Don't know if that answered your question, but hopefully a few pointers towards it.
Glenn.
Hi, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I've got so many questions, but this is the one I want to ask. You found success very early, and you hit gold, but if you enter Chelsea every year for the next 10 years, chances are you won't win gold every year. How professionally do you resist the temptation of chasing gold?
Yes. Well, the only way is down. The only way from gold and best in show is down, which or plateauing, because there is no other higher accolade. So we are going in with realistic expectations that this garden is more adventurous and therefore, may not medal well. To some extent, Chelsea sort of came about fairly naturally, so we feel that we're not trying to kick the door down there. We put in an idea, thought it would go nowhere, and it kind of happened. So in that sense, we're not building a career on show gardens mainly. I think the great thing about Chelsea is that you're working at the very high end of what you're doing, and it's a real, you're working with the best of the best. So career-wise, it does push us, and it's like if I could self-fund it, we probably, not that anyone would self-fund it, but you'd still do it because you learn so much through the process. But I think a lot of our work is unseen, is working with clients direct, building things that work for them, and that's kind of what we enjoy as well. So yeah, although this has been quite Chelsea heavy, once the dust settles, our days go back to being kind of our first love in our business, which is meeting a client and saying, yes, we can do something with this garden, and getting excited with them about that, away from anyone else knowing about it, really.
Michael.
Yes, hello Joe. Yes, again, it's been a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. Now, with my hat on as an accountant, how on earth do you afford to run shows at Chelsea from a small business?
Yeah.
Any income in some way we don't recognise?
Yes, we have a design fee which covers our work for the year on this, which is part of the budget. So we make sure that we are not running at a loss when we start. And then, they're big budget projects, and I suppose you've got to think the corporate world like Chelsea, because it's also a platform for them to invite potential clients to wine and dine them and get them to learn about their business. So we're at the bottom of that ladder, and so we're providing that experience for our sponsors as well. And our sponsors in this case, they are big players in the London market, and they want to kind of raise their profile. So this is a perfect way for them to do that. And in doing so, they're also supporting gardens that go on. This one goes on to a charity. So there's a definite kind of corporate social responsibility angle to it for them. But yeah, budget-wise, if we're sensible, it pays the bills. But it's such a big undertaking that we need breaks in between to go and build up a client base locally as well.
Tim.
It's just wondering whether Chelsea have any guidance about wheelchair access and things like that.
Yes, it's not the most accessible show because it's been on the same site for over 100 years and the site hasn't developed much. But they do have some exhibits that, particularly when they did the Horatio's Garden a few years back, which was a garden for people in wheelchairs, that was all accessible and you could actually go into it. You can't physically go into many of the gardens anyway, so really all you've got to think about is can you get around the trackway. I'd say from experience with members of the family who have access issues, who've come to see us, there is provision, but it's a long day and there's not much seating, and it's 100,000 people across sort of 6 days, so it's tight, it's busy, and if you're at a lower level because you're in a wheelchair, you don't really get to see much. So what you need is someone who's exhibiting a garden to get you in early, so you can come and have a look before the crowds turn up.
Any more questions?
I have a question. I'd like to ask my dad whether anything I said doesn't ring true. I should say actually my dad and my mum obviously took on a lot of the behind the scenes work last time. This time we're trying to do it slightly more measured because we've got one at school now, so we can't just all disappear off. But as sort of our next closest circle around us, my dad's probably a good person to ask what the experience is like outside of our little bubble.
Well, it was a very interesting presentation I've not heard before. What really struck me was this sense of the oil painting aspect. So when you look at a garden, and we looked at the chrysalis and the butterflies and this sort of thing, and we saw the charcoal fence at the back, but it's not until, it's like an oil painting on a piece of music, I suppose, it's not until you really stop and study it, you realise the depth of what goes into the design of that garden. I'm very impressed. I taught you more than that. Very impressed with just the depth of thought that goes into it. And as Joe said, a lot of it you just see on the surface. So we did childminding while they were doing the build, and we saw the finish. We didn't really get to see the huge numbers of people that were planting and replanting and building and all those sorts of things. So it's just a huge undertaking, and I think Joe's done it really well. Joe and Laura seem to work together very well, as he said, and it's been a rapid but very impressive authority.
Thank you. Richard.
Thank you. I'm just wondering where you recruit all the planters and builders, etc. from, actually.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we turned up, we used a first-time grower for Chelsea last time, and we're using them again, they were so brilliant. But there was a moment where we had really experienced contractors, and the garden was kind of ready for planting, and the plant team is the bit that we have to assemble, and we have to kind of recruit people for that. And our plants came in, and our people came in, and I looked at all the other gardens, and all I could see was branded jackets, even branded jackets over the plants. And I just had this moment of, oh my goodness, maybe we can't just do this with our friends. We have to actually be connected to some major corporate grower, which is why Golden Best Show was really great, because we just felt really vindicated from that feeling. But we just did it. We built a garden with people we know. People made it onto the plant team because of their character, not their experience, because it's it's kind of in line with how do we practice our faith and what really matters. We wanted people with us who were going to adopt our approach to doing this. So people who were happy to take breaks, who were going to laugh whilst building, who weren't going to be too serious and get very stressy and kind of tip everyone over the edge. So we had a plant team of about 11, 12 people. 4 or 5 of them were trained garden designers who were friends of ours, and the rest we just built up with people who basically will keep us calm. And it was really good fun. It was a really, really good way to do it, and we're just repeating that again this year. We've got the same few people, and we're all just going back. We really felt like the underdogs last time, and I did have a moment looking at the team thinking, so this is just people from home. It's people from, that person's from Blakely, that person's from Holt. I'm not sure we've all done this before, and then other gardens seem to have quite strict, kind of fierce-looking teams. But I think for us, it's the only way we want to do it, really. If we can do it with friends, and we can do it and still laugh and still joke and have coffee breaks and things like that, and actually enjoy it. Laura says that she looks at the show garden and you can see the stress in the garden, and a garden that's been built on stress will look stressed, and so whether you would be able to see that yourselves, I don't know, but I think there's something in that. I think you can see the kind of emotion behind the space when you're looking at it.
So just remember my question now, which is, I'm really struck by the fact that your 2 gardens that you talked about have quite a profound underlying message, which you're trying to convey through the planting. Listening to you, I can see how amazingly and successfully you do that. But what I'm wondering is, as somebody comes around looking at these different gardens and they look at your garden, how do you get that message over to the sort of average punter that might be just walking casually past? Do you have sort of leaflets you hand out, or is it in a brochure, or do you just feel that somehow the planting itself, the design, is going to convey that message?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's like a pyramid, really. So we have a 10-second phrase that gets said all day, every day for 6 days. So when someone walks up, we say, this is the such and such garden, and it's about blah, and that's for the passerby. And then we have the sort of 30 seconds, 1 minute, 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes phrases, and that's how we do the narrative. If you stay long enough, you get all of the richness of the story. But we want everyone to leave with the top element of the narrative, which is, this is the garden, it's about this, and if there's a support element, which there was with the first garden, you can donate here. So that's you've got to get that out like an elevator pitch very quickly. And there's a team of people at the show who haven't been mentioned. There's a whole team of staff at the show who are trained in knowing all the key plants and all the Latin names, and having the focus of the garden kind of on the tip of their tongue, which we're working on now for 25 years.
So does that message come verbally from talking to these people, or do you have literature, or do you just rely on people
Yeah.
in from what they can see?
Yeah, there's literature, there's also BBC coverage, and the interviewers ask the right things. If we've got time, a really quick anecdote about one garden next to us, which was for a charity I won't mention. They spent quite a lot on their leaflets, and they had sort of 10,000 leaflets to hand out. And after the show, we found out that their charity got a very significant donation because of being at Chelsea. And when they followed the thread as to who donated, the guy who was supposed to come and visit the garden had a bit one too many on a Friday night and didn't make it to Chelsea, and was sort of staggering home on the tube, and just grabbed a kind of a newspaper and a leaflet that had been left on a tube seat. And that was a leaflet from their garden, from another visitor who just left it on the train. He kept it, and then on the Monday morning when his boss said, right, who did you go and see? Who should we support? He just passed this leaflet over, and that man said, yes, we'll give them £100,000. So it's amazing the power of literature left on a tube train. So I'm going to be there this next month just flying out business cards on the tube, because obviously it works. But
So now we know a really good method for raising money for charities.
Yeah.
Maybe some volunteers to join you on the tube.
yeah, definitely. And we could do Blokes Brekky flyers as well if you want.
Indeed, absolutely, yeah. So thank you very much, Joe. Once again, that was fascinating and very helpful.